Hello there, one and all, and thank you very much for tuning in to episode 487 of Love at First Scent with me, Persolaise. The final one of the 4 live videos we've done today at the resumption of the sort of post-summer season. You know what I mean. The first comeback videos after the summer break. And We Are Sentient says, hi, I win. Yes, you do. You do for this video. Keith says, vintage. Otis says, I've always thought Egoiste and Platinum Egoiste are fantastic value for money. We Are Sentient says, I need some number 19, loving the number 5 Eau de Cologne a lot. How I loved Egoiste, says Alex Desmond. Would you still recommend the current formulations of these, says Ellie. Gavin says Egoiste, 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 but I know that what you actually mean is Egoiste, Egoiste. Am I right? Sandra says, love number 19. I have a vintage EDT. Treasure every drop. Okay, so after the three new release review videos, we're kind of going to slow things down a little bit and have some fun with these vintage finds that I made during my summer travels. So we've got, quite unexpectedly, we've got the Montana Homme, which was an Edouard Flechier composition from 1989. And we've got Chanel number 19 EDP and Chanel Egoiste. Now, before I spray them, before I smell them, I would love for somebody to explain something to me. It may be that there is no simple explanation, but if there is one, I bet somebody out there watching it will be able to tell me, and I'll ask the question when I can put my teeth back in and start stringing a sentence together. If somebody's got any kind of knowledge of Italy or the Italian retail scene, and I was going to say specifically Sicily, but this doesn't actually just apply to Sicily, because I've seen shops like this in other parts of Italy as well. In a lot of places that you go to in Italy, these were finds made in Sicily that I was very, very fortunate to make. But in a lot of the towns that you go into, particularly the smaller towns, there are still a few independent perfumeries around. But I'd love for somebody to explain to me how it is that they function and why they have the stock that they have. And I'll explain what I mean. You walk into them, and usually the impression that a lot of them make is that nobody's walked into them for like decades. But that can't be true. It can't be correct. A, because they wouldn't actually be there if they hadn't survived and hadn't made any money. And also, they do have new stuff. They have new stock. All of the latest releases from the big brands are there. Some of them even have sort of more independent releases. But also, so many of them seem to have a kind of a whole section, not exactly hidden, because they're not hidden. I haven't gone sort of like particularly hunting for these things, and I don't ask for them. My Italian is pretty poor, so I don't know if I'd have to use like Google Translate to hold up the screen and show the thing saying, do you have any old perfumes? But a lot of them seem to have bottles that appear to be, to my basic knowledge of vintage bottles, appear to be from the 90s. It's almost like there was a kind of massive overstocking in the 90s and the early part of the century, maybe even late 80s to some extent. And these things just didn't sell. And they're still there. And a lot of the time, they're just so dusty. They're gathering dust. They've been there for ages. I went back to one shop that I went to last summer, because last summer we went to Sicily as well. And some of the exact same stuff that was there last year was still there this year. And, I didn't buy it last year and I didn't buy it this year, but I thought, okay, so a whole year has passed. And that bottle of, in one case, actually, it was a bottle of Chanel number 5 Eau Premiere in the original bottle. It was still there in exactly the same place that it was last year. And I thought, okay, well, that clearly hasn't sold. And you're still charging what you're charging for it. And these things aren't, they don't charge extortionate money for them, but they're also not dirt cheap. They're not like some of the finds that you can make in Japan. And I just would really, really love for somebody to explain to me how this has happened. It's almost like there was a bit of a sort of time warp or a time blip on the 90s perfumery scene in Italy, and these things are still around. Gavin says, I think the cost of living is lower, so turnover needs to be less, especially in a rural community that lives almost directly on the land around them, I guess. I don't know, but I see. I don't know enough. I don't know if it's as simple as that. Thomas says, I think some bigger retailers send old stock back to the main warehouse and sell them there, and the smaller retailers just hold on to them. Well, yes, clearly they are just holding on to it, but I think they've been holding on to it forever. Alex says, I know this from Austria. They stocked the perfumes years ago, and when they don't sell, they just let them sit on the shelf till a customer falls in love. Yes, and I get that that is what's happened. But how come it seems to have happened, particularly for perfumes from that kind of late 80s to mid 90s bracket? Why is it those ones? A few years ago, again, this was Italy, I managed to pick up actually a bottle that I shared on this channel, a very, very, very old bottle of Chanel No. 5 Extrait. And I say that it's very old just based on the kind of aging that I've been able to do by looking at things online. But that was an exception. Most of the stuff that you find, I think, is kind of like 80s, 90s. There's also tons and tons of old shower gels and old soaps. And a lot of those I personally think are overpriced because I don't know, don't old shower gels go off? I mean, there was in one shop, there was a set of 3 Chanel No. 5 soaps. And I think the person wanted 70 odd euros for 3 very, very old looking soaps. And I just thought, nobody's going to buy this from me. I mean, maybe somebody will. I mean, I certainly didn't. I thought, I'm not going to spend 70 euros on 3 very, very dodgy looking soaps. But I'd love to find out. If anybody knows specifically about the Sicilian scene, the Sicilian retail scene, or the Italian scene in general, I'd love to find out what's caused this. Thomas says, let's not forget that Senstat Lambert 19 and Pour Monsieur don't sell. I just got a new bottle of Pour Monsieur from a pretty big retailer, and the bottle is 8 years old. Yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. But a lot of the stuff that I was looking at was quite commercial. I mean, there was one shop where I was just so tempted. They had an old Chopard that I'd never even heard of. And then some of the stuff you pick up as well, and you think, oh, I wonder if this is going to be old. And then you look at it and you realize that it's the shower gel or it's the aftershave lotion. There was one shop that had, I immediately homed in on the packaging because it was the original Michel Almarac Gucci Pour Homme packaging, but they were all aftershave lotions, and I'm not interested in that kind of thing. And Christian, of course, has to come in with the Sicilian joke. I wondered how long it would take. It says, Christian says, if it's Sicily, maybe they're just waiting for someone to make them an offer they can't refuse. I did actually go to the Opera House in Palermo where Godfather Part 3 was filmed. Well worth seeing if you've ever... The Opera House, maybe not so much the film, although I think the film is somewhat underrated. How do you find these shops? Do you look them up beforehand or stumble upon them, says Ellie? No, we're just wandering around town. And I go, oh, look, this looks like an old perfumery. And then you walk in and Madame Persolaise gives me this look and says, are we going to be here for a while? And I go, yes, I think so. And then, that's the rest of the afternoon gone. I mean, I'm exaggerating slightly, but no, I mean, they're just there. They're just there. They're not in the big places so much. So I didn't find any in Palermo. I didn't find any in Catania. But the smaller towns, yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. I'd love to know why. Okay. Felix says, I got the same experience in Italy. Maybe the distributors accept no returns. Interesting. But it's just the fact, these things are in the shop. They're taking up space. I don't know. They're just gathering dust. They don't look particularly nice, as in, because they are gathering dust. And then there is, wouldn't you want to kind of just like put them to one side and clean up the shelves and present the new stuff in a I don't know. I don't get it, but I'm very, very happy that it is how it is. Let's start with the Montana, because this was a little bit of a revelation. I wasn't so familiar with this. I must have smelt it when it came out, because in 1989, when I was a teenager, my mum was still working in perfume retail, and absolutely, I must have been aware of this scent. It would have been around. The Montana for women, you know, which we now called, what do we call it now? The Parfum de Peau was, of course, a huge hit. And the other thing as well, of course, is you buy these blind. So there I am on my phone, kind of going on any website I can find. In this case, it was on the, you know, parfumo.com website and looking up base notes and things. And I kind of go, oh, it's by Flechier. Oh, gosh, it sounds interesting. It sounds like it's going to be one of those kinds of 80s masculines that makes sort of free use of floral notes. But you don't know what condition it's going to be in. I also got an eau de patou, which I might share in another video. And the bottle was broken, but by the time you find out, you know, you're kind of miles away from that town, and you think, okay, well, you know, I'd spend more on the petrol going back to this town and kicking up a fuss than I actually did on the bottle. So that's part of the excitement, I suppose. And you don't know which ones are going to be in good conditions and which condition and which ones aren't. But this one is in really, really good condition. I suppose it helps that it's in a dark bottle. I suppose it helps that it looked as though it was being kept in the shade. Although shade, you know, is a kind of relative concept, I think, in Sicily, because boy, was it hot there this year. Anyway, so Montana pour Homme, 1989, Edouard Flechier. The top is a bit off, and so often the top notes are a little bit off because citruses don't keep particularly well. But those off notes actually, in this case, fade quite quickly. It would be fascinating to smell an original formulation of this. I mean, I'm just going on what's online. Okay, so the top notes apparently are mandarin, pepper, and nutmeg. And things like mandarin, tangerine, those sorts of citrus oils really, really don't last very well. But you then immediately get into a real kind of troisième homme de Caronne, Garland, Derby, confident, assertive, but very 80s kind of shoulder padded, hairy chest type guy. According to the interwebs, it's geranium, nasturtium, and patchouli and sandalwood in the heart. And that's what kind of sold it to me. Plus the fact that the shopkeeper obviously decided he had to take off the sticker because this came with a 40% discount, no less, which actually made it pretty cheap. And I was going to say it's the kind of thing that they don't make anymore, but of course, 2 videos back, I reviewed the new The Dandy from Penhaligon's by Fabrice Pellegrin, which definitely starts off in this kind of somewhat more butch masculine way. But the difference between this and The Dandy is that this one's dry down is really, really nicely done. Again, according to the internet, the base notes are ambergris, civet, and musk. So heaven only knows if animals were harmed in the making of this perfume. If people are in case you're interested, on the back, all it says that it's got is alcohol and fragrance and water. And that is it. Keith says, I have vintage Montana Parfum Homme, but not Homme the Parfum. Homme is great. Ooh, I didn't know there was a difference. So what have I got? This is an EDT. So this is Montana Homme. I can get vintage Homme for a very reasonable price. So not Homme the Parfum. Okay, I didn't even realize there was a distinction there. Ellie says, I've been told by sales assistants in Asia that they don't keep any bottles with an expiration date sooner than 1 year. Is that the case in Europe? Pass. No idea. No idea. Oh, and I get the Patou reference. Okay, we'll have to do a Patou video because I picked up a vintage Eau de Patou and a vintage Joy because I couldn't resist. I had to get the Joy. It was an EDT, but I had to get it. This is, it's just so romantic. You know, in that era which we now associate with materialism and excess and greed and selfishness and money grabbing, paradoxically, a lot of the men's scents that came out were actually really, really, really romantic and heartfelt. They had a very, very strong, definite beating heart. At least that's what I think. You know, even Fahrenheit, for all its kind of strange, off-putting hissiness, was very poetic. It has a very, very poetic sort of soul. Please do a Patou video, says Alex. I will do my best. I do have a pre-sprayed Montana. Where is the pre-sprayed one? Yeah, just, you know, the musk's not overplayed. The civet is certainly not, you know, you don't get that kind of fecal civet note. If anything, maybe it's just a kind of general warmth, but it's the florals that are just so beautifully supported. It does feel 80s. It's got that thing that Madame Persolaise calls just a slight hint of fly spray, which I think is the way that she describes certain somewhat more brash woody notes, but it works so well. I mean, Flechier was so talented, or is talented. I mean, I'm sure he still is. I assume he's still around. He hasn't passed away, has he? No, Flechier hasn't passed away. Really nice stuff. Then we have the number 19. Now, just the fact that it's an EDP tells us that the oldest it could possibly be is 80s, right? Because obviously the EDP formulation didn't exist until the 80s. I don't know about batch codes and things like that, but this strikes me as sort of 90s packaging. So the original Chanel number 19, of course, came out in 1971. It was created by Henri Robert. And then the EDP version, I'm pretty sure, came out in the 80s. And all of those sorts of versions that came out then were created by Jacques Polge, who was in-house perfumer then. And the sprayer is a bit dodgy. Now, number 19 is one of my favorite compositions of all time, and I treasure a number 19 extrait that I found in Japan several years ago. So, We Are Sentient says, Raiders of the Lost Scent has some great posts for dating some brands, Chanel, Patou, Guerlain, and that. Yes, you're absolutely right, but also what that blog, that website, which is just brilliant, really useful, what it also highlights is that sometimes it's hard to work out the aging of certain bottles. Again here, I think maybe the top is just a tiny bit iffy. That glorious green galbanum hyacinthy opening that you want from Chanel, the number 19, is perhaps not quite as glorious as it could be, not quite as sharp. But that sort of off section fades away again very quickly, and you're straight into, I think, quite a pronounced vetiver aspect. I don't know what it is about 19, but some batches must have either dosed the vetiver differently or used a different quality of vetiver, because some batches of number 19 go very vetiver in the dry down and some don't, and they also go differently vetiver on different people. The bottle looks very 1996, says Paz. Yeah, well, you probably know more about it than I do, but yes, it feels 90s somehow, doesn't it? And somebody out there will just watch this and be able to date it straight away. Ellie says, where do you find vintage fragrance shops in Japan? Okay, in Japan, you need to look for what they call recycle shops. And also you need to go to antiques fairs and antiques markets. I don't think the vintage finds there nowadays are as good as they used to be, because a lot of the stuff has been bought up. But I think you can still pick up bargains. So look for recycle shops and look for antiques fairs. Number 19, this is a surprisingly approachable version of 19. We've had this conversation on this channel many times before about whether 19 is off-putting, whether it's too haughty, whether it's too arrogant. I've always sort of said that I actually think it's just formal, which is what I love about it. It presents a formality from a bygone age. But this, maybe because the woods and the leathers have really mellowed with time, this comes across, and it actually comes across as more masculine than you expect number 19 to be. We have a pre-sprayed. Where's the pre-sprayed 19? Oh, there we are. Yeah. So this is, it's like the greenness has kind of faded away from this bottle, and I don't mean just from number 19 generally, but from this particular bottle that was stored in the way that it was stored in this particular shop. But that's okay. I'm not complaining. I'm quite happy to have one bottle of number 19 in my collection that is kind of woodier and less green. It's definitely sort of gone less floral and more woody. I mean, maybe that's what number 19 does over time. Maybe the woods take over, but it's still just supremely elegant and really interesting. And the reason why I wanted to leave the Egoiste for the end is because I've actually got a little bit of a comparison with the current version. Now, this one didn't have a proper box because the box was actually this one. They made out that they were selling the tester. Now, I don't know whether this was the original box that this bottle came in. Maybe they lost the original box and they had a tester box and they sort of put this one in the tester box. I just don't know. There is nothing on the bottle to say that this is a tester. You know, it doesn't say anything like, you know, demonstration only or not for sale. It does make it very, very much more difficult to date because you don't have any of the details on the packaging. All I have is a batch code engraved onto the bottle. And from the very, very quick bit of research that I did online, again, this batch code which suggests that this is a 90s bottle. But if I'm wrong, please feel to correct me if you know better. Apparently, there are all sorts of clues you can look for, like whether Paris is above or below Chanel, whether the EDT label is above or below the Chanel, etc., etc. Ellie says, do they allow you to test or smell the vintage fragrances in the shops in Italy, or do you just have to buy based on looks? I haven't asked. I haven't said, look, can I? Because a lot of them are still sealed in the cellophane. So I think if I said, can I smell this first? I think the answer would be no. You know, it's sealed, and it's staying sealed until you buy it. Gavin says, current EDT is like an EDT of the original EDT of Egoiste, still good. Now, until I tried this, I was still a big fan of current Egoiste EDT, and I am still a fan. This is my sort of recent-ish bottle. It may be, I don't know, it might be about 3 or 4 years old. Still 100% recognizably Egoiste. But when I smelled this one, it was like an immediate kind of time machine back, and I thought, aha, now I remember how this stuff used to smell. And the difference is subtle, but it is definite, because the structure of the scent is absolutely still the same. It's still that kind of unusual for a masculine perfume, kind of like baked candied fruit, candied apple note that then goes into a really, really beautiful kind of spicy, cinnamony, carnation-y heart with the sort of tobacco and sandalwood in the base. A lot of you out there will know that Egoiste was actually a kind of reworking of an old Chanel called Bois Noir, which was, I think, released as a sort of very, very limited distribution exclusive. And then Jacques Polge and Francois Demachy turned it into Egoiste. I don't think it did particularly well. I mean, it's obviously still around, but quite soon after they released it, they had to release, or they felt they had to release, Platinum Egoiste, which is a very, very different sort of scent, much more kind of mainstreamy. And I think that did better. But yeah, the difference between smelling this and the current is almost like the difference between smelling vintage Guerlain Samsara and current Samsara. There is something about the sandalwood in this version which just adds this extra layer of smoothness, suaveness, sophistication. I mean, it actually makes it heavenly. It makes it sort of beautiful, genius perfume. Everything is so seamlessly blended. You can see how this then led to Olivier Polge making the original Dior Homme at the beginning of the 21st century. You know, you can completely trace that lineage in this sort of taking fruity floral notes, blending them with woods and sandalwood to create something that's kind of intriguingly masculine. Now, the current version ticks all of the boxes in the sense that all of the ingredients are present and accounted for, but everything just feels a touch too harsh, a touch too strident. Like the fruits are just a little bit too raspy, a little bit too angry. The sandalwood is just a little bit too rough. And you really, really feel the difference in the dry down. So here I've got a current Egoiste that was sprayed maybe about 3.5 hours ago. And it's very, very attractive, very nicely done, highly wearable. But there's just something screechy about it. And then I go to the vintage, and you get smooth pipe tobacco. You get that milky creaminess of the sandalwood. The difference is really, really marked in the dry down. it's beautiful. It's really, really beautiful. The original is beautiful, and I'm so lucky that this is, I think, to my nose, in pretty much perfect olfactory condition. So I couldn't wait to share these with you. Okay, here we are, folks. We are back. 4 videos done. Don't say I'm not being good to you with doing 4 videos in one go. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do consider doing so. If you've enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to find out how you can support my work, you should be able to see a link to my Ko-fi page in the video description below. By the way, I should also say thank you very, very much for all of the lovely comments that I received while I was away. I really appreciated them. I really appreciated the outpouring of enthusiasm when I announced that I would be doing, resuming the videos today. And lots more videos coming your way between now and the end of the year. Hopefully lots of interviews. I've got one interview lined up for the 16th of September, but I just need to get final confirmation of it before I tell you who it's going to be with. It should be an exciting one. Lots of top 10s coming your way. Let us get the party going straight away. Thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned to social media for details of more videos coming your way. But until then, be good. Bye now.